My sister begged me to fund her dream wedding. Then Mom texted that I was a disgrace and banned me. So I quietly shifted every remaining bill onto her perfect husband, watched them panic in public, and let the family discover the truth. I, 35 male, have been the responsible one in my family since I was probably 14 years old. You know that guy in every family who somehow becomes the go-to solution for everyone else's terrible life choices? Yeah, that's me. My phone buzzes at 2 a.m. because Mom needs me to loan Dad $800 for a transmission repair, except they'd blown their car fund on a spontaneous trip to Cabo. Sister calls crying because she blew her rent money on a designer purse in some MLM pyramid scheme. And guess who's transferring cash before she gets evicted again? And like an absolute chump, I always said yes every single time. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't exactly struggling. I'd worked my ass off building a solid plumbing business, saved up a decent chunk of change, and lived below my means. Turns out people will pay good money to fix their broken toilets and burst pipes. And I was smart enough to invest the profits instead of blowing them on stupid shit like my family did. But somewhere along the way, my bank account became the family's emergency fund. Stacy, my younger sister, was the golden child. 29 years old, and she'd never held a job longer than 6 months because retail was soul-crushing and office work stifled her creativity. She once told me with a completely straight face that paying bills was just society's way of controlling the free spirit. I kid you not. This woman thought electricity just magically happened and rent was more of a suggestion than an obligation. But Mom and Dad, they ate that crap up with a spoon. Stacy was an artist, they'd say, too sensitive for the regular world. Meanwhile, I'm crawling under houses and fixing broken sewer lines, apparently too blue-collar to deserve basic respect. My best friend Alan, a fellow contractor who runs an electrical business and has zero patience for bullshit, put it best one night over beers. Dude, your family treats you like a freaking vending machine. They push your buttons, you dispense cash, and nobody says thank you. And honestly, I couldn't remember the last time they'd asked how I was doing. Last fall, Stacy dropped the engagement bomb. She'd been dating this guy, Trevor, for all of 3 months, and suddenly they're picking out venues, like they'd been together since high school. Trevor was everything my parents wished I could be. MBA from some fancy business school. Wore suits to work every day like he was closing billion-dollar deals instead of processing insurance claims in middle management. Drove a leased BMW. The kind of guy who used buzzwords to order coffee and thought his business degree made him superior to us working-class peasants. Dad immediately started treating him like the son he never had, the successful son. Trevor really has his life together, he'd say right in front of me. Finally, someone in this family with real ambition. Mom would nod along and add how nice it was that Stacy found someone who could provide for her properly. Meanwhile, I'm the guy who literally kept their lights on and prevented their house from flooding when the main water line burst last winter. But apparently fixing toilets doesn't count as real success. Trevor loved to remind me of this. He had this condescending way of talking to me like I was some kind of charity case who needed career advice. He'd suggest I think about expanding beyond the hands-on work, pausing on hands-on like I was picking up roadkill, instead of running a business that cleared 6 figures annually. The engagement party was at Olive Garden. Stacy's choice because it was ironic and fun, but really because Trevor was cheap as hell despite all his big talk about investing in quality experiences. He proposed with a ring that definitely came from one of those no payments for 12 months jewelry store deals, and everyone acted like he just presented her with the crown jewels. Mom gushed about how perfect Trevor was for Stacy. Dad shook his hand like he was greeting the Pope and actually called him son. Alan was there for the engagement dinner. Stacy had invited him because she wanted all my friends to meet Trevor. Big mistake. Alan sized Trevor up in about 30 seconds and spent the rest of the night making subtle digs that went completely over Trevor's head, asking him about how exciting insurance management must be and how he was really making a difference in people's lives. Trevor ate it up, talking about risk assessment matrices and claims optimization protocols like he was saving the world one denied claim at a time. Later in the parking lot, Alan shook his head. That guy's faker than a $3 bill. Bet you $20 he's drowning in debt trying to keep up appearances. That's when Stacy started talking about her dream wedding. Pinterest boards appeared overnight. Venue tours commenced. She had spreadsheets for everything except the actual budget. The hints started subtle. She'd sigh during family dinners about wishing they could afford the lakeside venue, but it was just so expensive. Then she'd give me that look like a puppy staring at a treat just out of reach. Mom joined in saying how she wished they could help more. but things were tight right now. Translation: Dad bought a $3,000 fishing boat last month, and they blew their savings on that Cabo trip. Trevor would just sit there with this smug little smile, like he was watching peasants beg for scraps, occasionally mentioning how Stacy deserved the best. The pressure campaign lasted about 2 weeks before I finally agreed, not because I wanted to, but because watching Stacy mope around and Mom drop increasingly obvious hints was like Chinese water torture. So at Sunday dinner, I dropped the bomb. Fine, I'll cover the wedding expenses. Not help out, not contribute. I offered to handle the venue, catering, flowers, photography, the whole 9 yards. Stacy literally started crying and jumped up to hug me like I just told her she won the lottery. Trevor shook my hand with this firm businessman grip like we just closed a major deal. Mom beamed at me like I'd finally done something right, telling Stacy how lucky she was to have a brother who understood what family meant. For about 5 minutes, I felt like maybe all those years of being the family's financial safety net had actually earned me some genuine appreciation. Maybe they finally saw me as more than just a bank account with a pulse. Alan pulled me aside afterward with that expression he gets when I'm being particularly stupid. "You sure about this, man? That's a lot of cash to drop on people who barely acknowledge you exist most of the time." "It's Stacy's wedding," I said. "Family, you know." "If you say so, brother, just keep your receipts." I should have listened to Alan. Planning Stacy's dream wedding was like herding cats while those cats set money on fire and criticized your technique. By March, the venue alone was running $12,000. The catering estimate came back at $8,500 for 87 guests. Apparently, she had decided she needed the premium package with past hors d'oeuvres and a carving station. The flower arrangements she'd picked out looked like they belonged at a state funeral and cost about as much as my truck. But here's where it gets interesting. All these vendors wanted contracts signed and deposits paid, but they also needed someone to be the primary contact for final billing and day-of coordination. The venue coordinator explained during one of our many phone calls that they needed one person designated as the primary account holder for final charges and last-minute decisions, usually the groom or the person paying. That little piece of information got filed away in my brain for later use. Stacy changed her mind about everything roughly every 48 hours. First roses, then peonies, then some exotic flower that cost $200 per centerpiece, then back to roses, but a different color because they clashed with the bridesmaids' dresses that she'd also changed 3 times. She'd snap whenever I questioned the constant changes, insisting this was her one special day and she shouldn't have to settle for less than perfect just because I was being cheap. Meanwhile, I'm juggling wedding vendor calls during my lunch breaks between plumbing jobs, reviewing contracts after work, and basically functioning as an unpaid wedding planner while Stacy focused on the creative aspects, which apparently meant saving inspiration photos on Pinterest and changing her mind every 2 days. Trevor's contribution to the planning process was providing strategic oversight. Translation: He'd show up to vendor meetings, act like he was in charge, then leave all the actual work to me. He'd tell people I had the practical stuff handled while he focused on the bigger picture. The condescension was constant. When I'd suggest more budget-friendly options, Trevor would give me that patronizing smile and explain that some things were worth the investment, that this was about quality, not just getting the cheapest option. From the guy contributing exactly $0 to the investment. Alan watched me stress about vendor coordination one evening over beers and just shook his head. "Dude, you realize you're basically being their unpaid wedding planner while they treat you like the help, right? When's the last time either of them even said thank you?" I couldn't remember. Mom and Dad were even worse. They'd defer to Trevor on every decision like he was paying for everything. "What does Trevor think?" became their default response to any question. When I'd point out that maybe the guy funding the wedding should have some say in the planning, Mom would get that tight-lipped look and tell me not to be difficult, that Trevor had excellent taste. The vendors started knowing me by name and treating me like their most high-maintenance client. They could hear the exhaustion in my voice when I'd explain that no, we're not doing the $300 orchid arrangements anymore. We're back to the roses. But now they need to match the bridesmaids' dresses. 3 months into planning, my spreadsheet of wedding expenses looked like a small country's defense budget. I'd spent more on Stacy's one-day party than most people spend on a car. And every time I'd bring up the mounting costs, Stacy would get this wounded look and ask why I was trying to ruin her day. The guilt trips were masterful. Mom would chime in about how important this day was for Stacy, how she was only going to get married once. Dad would nod along and add his sage wisdom about it being an investment in my sister's happiness. But I kept writing checks and making calls and coordinating deliveries because I'm apparently a glutton for punishment. Plus, deep down, I figured this was finally my chance to be the hero, instead of just the guy who fixes everyone's mistakes. Big mistake. Thursday, May 15th. I remember the exact date because it's permanently burned into my brain. I was finishing up a bathroom remodel, hands covered in grout, when my phone buzzed. A text from Mom that I'll never forget. "Hi, Derek. Just wanted to let you know that Stacy and Trevor think it might be better if you don't come to the wedding. Trevor thinks your presence might make things uncomfortable since you two are from such different backgrounds. Hope you understand." I stared at that message for a solid 30 seconds, waiting for the follow-up text that would explain it was a joke or a mistake. Nothing came. Just that cheerful little smiley face emoji. Like she just told me they ran out of my favorite potato salad at the family barbecue. I screenshotted that message immediately and sent it to Alan with no commentary. His response came back in about 10 seconds. "Are you freaking kidding me?" Then my phone rang. Alan didn't bother with hello. "Tell me that's not real. Wish I could. They uninvited you from a wedding you're paying for because you might embarrass the groom. Different backgrounds, apparently." There was silence on the other end for about 5 seconds. Then Alan started laughing. The kind of dark, dangerous laughing that usually precedes someone doing something spectacularly stupid or brilliantly vengeful. "Oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely freaking perfect. You know what this means, right? That my family are assholes? No, brother. Well, yes, but that's not the point. This means you're about to teach some very expensive lessons about respect, and I'm going to help." I waited 2 hours before responding to Mom's text, mostly because I didn't trust myself to type anything that wouldn't get me arrested or committed. When I finally replied, it was simple. "Interesting. I'll need to review some things. Read receipts showed they saw it immediately." No response. That night, Alan came over with Chinese takeout and a bottle of whiskey, spreading wedding contracts across my kitchen table like he was planning a military operation. "Let's talk about leverage," he said. "Alan has this beautiful quality where he can be absolutely ruthless while maintaining the demeanor of someone discussing the weather. He went through my wedding contracts with the focus of a forensic accountant, pointing out that I'd paid deposits on everything, but the final balances don't get charged until the week of the wedding. And every single contract had me listed as the primary contact, but they all had signature lines for final authorization of charges, meaning you can transfer primary responsibility to someone else as long as you get their signature authorizing the charges," he explained. "It's standard language to protect vendors from payment disputes between families." He called his lawyer buddy Jake to confirm the legal implications. After a 10-minute conversation that involved a lot of jargon I didn't understand, Alan hung up with a smile that would make a shark nervous. According to Jake, I could legally transfer the contracts to Trevor as long as he signed documents authorizing the final payments. The vendors didn't care who paid as long as someone was legally responsible for the bills. "But why would Trevor sign anything?" I asked. "Because you're going to tell him it's to make him look like the provider." The plan was diabolically simple. I'd prepare contract amendments transferring liability to Trevor, then convince Stacy and Trevor to sign them by framing it as a romantic gesture. Trevor gets to look like the big shot provider. Stacy gets her fairy tale wedding where her husband is the hero, and I get the most expensive lesson in family dynamics ever delivered. What about the deposits I already paid? Consider them the price of tuition for the master class you're about to teach. Plus, think about it. Trevor's going to get hit with about $25,000 in final bills on his wedding day. That BMW payment is going to seem pretty manageable compared to explaining to his new wife their honeymoon got canceled. Alan spent the next 3 hours helping me craft the contract amendments. We made them look official as hell. Letterhead, legal language, the works. The key was making them seem like standard paperwork rather than a trap. The cover letter was a masterpiece of manipulation explaining how I wanted Trevor recognized as the primary provider for his new family. That these amendments would transfer the vendor contracts to his name so Stacy's wedding day would reflect his ability to take care of her. I'd already handled the deposits as my gift, but having his name on the final contracts would show everyone that he was the man stepping up for his wife. "You're evil," I told Alan when we finished. "I'm efficient," he corrected. "There's a difference." Friday morning, I called Stacy with the plan. I explained how I'd been thinking about what Trevor said about being a provider for his new family, and I wanted to do something special for them. I wanted Trevor's name on all the vendor contracts so that on their wedding day, everyone would know that her husband was the one who made it all happen. I'd already paid the deposits as my gift, but the final payment should come from Trevor, so he gets all the credit. Stacy started crying, happy crying for once. She thought it was really sweet and said Trevor would love that, mentioning how he'd been feeling weird about me paying for everything. I figured no man wants to feel like he's not providing for his wife, so this way he gets to be the hero and I get to be the supportive brother-in-law. Win-win. She called back 2 hours later. Trevor loved the idea. They'd both sign whatever paperwork I needed. Could I bring it by that weekend? Alan was at my house when I got off the phone, and the look on his face was pure admiration. That, he said, was art. Saturday afternoon, I showed up at Stacy and Trevor's apartment with a folder full of official-looking documents and the demeanor of someone handling routine paperwork. Trevor was practically glowing with self-importance, telling me how thoughtful this was and how he appreciated me understanding that he wanted to be the provider. I laid out the contract amendments on their dining table, walking them through each document and explaining what vendors they covered. I emphasized how this would make Trevor the primary contact for everything. The venue, catering, flowers, photography, DJ, everything would get billed directly to him. His name, his responsibility, his wedding. Trevor signed everything with the confidence of a man who thought he was getting a good deal. Stacy signed as co-authorizer, with hearts practically floating over her head. Just to confirm, I said as they finished the last signatures, you understand that all final payments, venue balance, catering, flowers, everything, will be charged to you starting next week. The deposits are covered, but the remaining balances are your responsibility now. Right, Trevor said, not really paying attention because he was too busy admiring his signature on official documents. Alan was waiting in his truck outside, trying not to laugh when I got in. When I told him Trevor had signed everything and $24,000 in bills were about to hit him starting Monday, Alan asked about the family fallout. That's the best part. I didn't cancel anything. I didn't ruin anything. I just made sure that the person who thinks he's too good to have me at his wedding gets to prove he can actually afford the wedding he's so proud of. Alan shook his head admiringly, calling it educational. Trevor was about to learn that talking big and backing it up are two very different things, and my family was about to learn that the guy they treat like an embarrassment is also the guy who's been keeping their whole fantasy afloat. Sunday came and went without any frantic calls, which meant they hadn't figured out the implications yet. But Monday morning, my phone started buzzing. Monday morning, the bills started hitting Trevor's accounts, like missiles finding their targets. The venue called first around 9 a.m., asking for final payment of $12,000 and change by Wednesday to confirm Saturday's booking. Then the caterer called about the $8,500 final balance due Thursday. The florist followed Tuesday morning, needing $3,000 for the flower arrangements. By Tuesday afternoon, Trevor's panic had reached biblical proportions. My phone rang around 3 p.m. Trevor. And he sounded like a man watching his financial life flash before his eyes. Derek, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the vendor contracts. What kind of mistake? They're all calling me for payment, like full payment, $24,000 worth of payments. Right, that's what we discussed when you signed the contracts. You wanted to be the provider, remember? But I didn't realize it was that much money all at once. Can't we work something out? The desperation in his voice was beautiful. This was the same guy who'd spent months talking down to me like I was some kind of charity case. And now he was begging me to bail him out. I'm not sure what you want me to do, Trevor. You signed contracts taking responsibility for those payments. The vendors are just doing their job. But I don't have $24,000. And there it was, the truth behind all the fancy suits and business school terminology and condescending advice about expanding my business. He was broke, probably drowning in debt from trying to maintain his lifestyle on an insurance adjuster's salary. That sounds like a problem between you and your creditors. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're good with money, right? Business school and all that. He hung up. Alan called me an hour later, laughing so hard he could barely talk. Apparently, Trevor had posted on Facebook asking if anyone knew any short-term lending options for unexpected expenses, and the comments were brutal. Stacy called that evening crying. Trevor was having a panic attack, calling everyone he knew trying to borrow money. His parents couldn't help. Her friends didn't have that kind of cash, and the vendors were threatening to cancel everything. He wanted to postpone the wedding until they could save up the money. I pointed out that it was Thursday and the wedding was Saturday, which made postponing a bit challenging. Stacy begged me to just pay for it like we originally planned, promising she'd make sure I got invited. Trevor was just nervous about fitting in with my friends. He didn't mean anything by it. My friends. Like I was the one with the social problem. I explained that he had signed legal documents taking responsibility for those payments because he wanted the credit for taking care of his wife. I couldn't just override his wishes like that. When Stacy wailed that they didn't have the money, I suggested maybe they should have thought about that before deciding I wasn't good enough to attend. She realized I was doing this on purpose, and I didn't deny it. Trevor made his choice when he signed those contracts. She made her choice when she decided I was too embarrassing to have at her wedding. She hung up on me. Friday morning brought the inevitable family intervention. Mom, Dad, and Stacy showed up at my job site like some kind of dysfunctional SWAT team. "Derek, this has gone too far," Mom announced. "We made a mistake, but you're punishing Stacy for it. I'm not punishing anyone." Dad stepped forward with his stern patriarch voice. "Son, we know you're upset about the wedding invitation thing, but destroying your sister's wedding isn't the answer. I didn't destroy anything. All the vendors are ready to go. Trevor just needs to pay them like he agreed to do when he signed the contracts." "But he doesn't have that kind of money," Stacy wailed. "Then maybe he shouldn't have signed contracts agreeing to pay it." I'd been completely honest about what the contracts meant. The fact that he'd been too arrogant to pay attention to the numbers wasn't my problem. Alan drove by the job site around noon and found me eating lunch in my truck while my family continued their dramatic pleading outside. When he asked how the guilt trip was going, I told him they wanted me to bail Trevor out so Stacy could have her perfect day. Trevor was trying to get emergency loans. Stacy was calling every person she'd ever met looking for money. Mom and Dad were acting like I was the villain for letting Trevor be the provider he claimed he wanted to be. Alan pointed out that everybody was learning valuable lessons about financial planning. The wedding was supposed to happen in 24 hours and Trevor still didn't have the money. The vendors were getting antsy about payment guarantees. Stacy was having daily meltdowns, and I was getting a front row seat to watch the whole house of cards collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. Friday evening, Trevor called one last time. "Derek, I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll admit I was wrong about everything. I'll make sure everyone knows you're the one who made this wedding possible. Just please pay the vendors. I'll find a way to pay you back." And there it was. The guy who'd been too embarrassed to be seen with me at his wedding was now begging me to save his ass. "That's a generous offer, Trevor, but you know what? I think you've got this handled. Time to provide." Saturday morning was beautiful. Perfect wedding weather. I spent it at home drinking coffee on my deck and reading the newspaper for the first time in months. My phone was buzzing constantly with updates I didn't ask for, but Alan kept me informed. The wedding had moved to the city park. You know, the one with the rusty playground equipment and the geese. Stacy was wearing her dress, but the reception was basically a potluck in the pavilion. Trevor's cousin brought a cooler of Bud Light. The photographer was Trevor's brother-in-law with an iPhone. The DJ was a Bluetooth speaker. Trevor looked like he was about to vomit. Stacy kept trying to smile for photos, but you could see the crazy in her eyes. Best part, Trevor's dad asked him why they moved the wedding to the park. Trevor told him they wanted something more intimate. His dad goes, "More intimate than the venue Derek paid for?" Awkward silence level, maximum. The pictures that eventually surfaced on social media told the whole story. Carefully cropped photos that hid the picnic tables and discount decorations. Close-up shots of Stacy's dress that conveniently avoided showing the playground in the background. Everyone was trying to sell the intimate outdoor celebration narrative, but you could see the truth in their eyes. This wasn't rustic chic. This was damage control. Monday morning, I got a text from Stacy. "I hope you're happy. Our honeymoon got canceled because Trevor had to use the money to pay off the credit cards, but I guess that was your plan all along." "Screw you." I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? That maybe they should have thought about their finances before signing contracts they couldn't afford. That maybe treating your financial safety net like an embarrassment has consequences. 3 weeks after the park wedding disaster, I thought the whole thing was behind me. Trevor and Stacy had their shitty wedding, learned some expensive lessons about budgeting, and I got to enjoy the sweet satisfaction of watching entitled people face reality. Then Mom decided to rewrite history. It started with a Facebook post that Alan screenshotted and sent to me with a message, "Bro, you need to see this shit." The post was a masterpiece of victimhood and manipulation. Sometimes family disappoints you in ways you never imagined. When your own son steals money meant for his sister's wedding, and then abandons the family in their time of need, it breaks your heart. Derek promised to pay for Stacy's wedding, took money from us for deposits, then disappeared when the bills came due. Poor Stacy and Trevor had to scramble to put together something at the last minute because her own brother was too jealous and selfish to keep his word. We raised him better than this. Some people just can't handle seeing others succeed. The comments were already pouring in from their church friends, neighbors, and extended family, expressing shock and sympathy for having such an awful son who would steal from his own sister and ruin her special day out of bitter jealousy. My phone was ringing before I finished reading. Alan was predictably outraged. "They're calling you a thief, dude. A freaking thief after you paid for their entire life for decades." I was weirdly calm about it. Maybe because I'd been expecting something like this ever since the park wedding photos went up. Mom couldn't handle people asking questions about why the venue changed, so she needed a villain to blame. And since I was already the family scapegoat, why not make me the thief too? When Alan asked what I was going to do, I told him I was going to teach them a lesson. Saturday morning, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, my file cabinet, and a cup of coffee. Time to compile the greatest hits of Derek's financial bailouts, featuring screenshots of every Venmo, Zelle, and bank transfer I'd sent them over the past 5 years. Photos of checks I'd written for their car repairs, medical bills, and mortgage payments. Text message conversations, where they begged for money. Email threads about Stacy's wedding planning, where they kept demanding more expensive options. The original contracts showing I'd paid all the deposits, the amended contracts Trevor and Stacy had signed, taking over financial responsibility. And the crown jewel, Mom's original text uninviting me from the wedding. Alan came over around noon with sandwiches and found me surrounded by printed documents. "Jesus, there's a lot of evidence here," he said. 5 years of evidence, I corrected. Every time I bailed them out, every time they promised to pay me back, every time they treated me like their personal bank account, I kept good records. It took me 3 hours to write the post. I wanted it to be factual, devastating, and impossible to argue with. No emotion, no name-calling, just cold, hard documentation of exactly what kind of people my parents really were. I started by explaining that since my mother had decided to share her version of recent events, I thought it was time the family got the full story with actual proof. Then I laid it all out, every single thing. The most damaging part was the timeline of the wedding situation. Screenshots of Stacy begging me to pay for everything. Trevor's condescending messages about being the provider. The contracts showing I'd paid thousands in deposits. The amended contracts they'd eagerly signed to take credit for the wedding. And finally, the uninvitation text from Mom. I clarified that I didn't steal anything. I paid exactly what I contractually agreed to pay. The fact that Trevor couldn't afford the wedding he so desperately wanted to take credit for wasn't theft. It was called financial reality. As for being jealous of their success, I was the one who'd been bankrolling their success for over 2 decades. The only thing I was jealous of was families who don't treat their relatives like ATM machines. I ended by announcing that I was done enabling financial irresponsibility and then being blamed when people have to face the consequences of their own choices. I posted it at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. The response was immediate and brutal. Alan was refreshing the post every 30 seconds, giving me a play-by-play. Aunt Linda was calling my mom a liar. Uncle Mike was asking for my Venmo history with the family. My cousin Jessica posted, "Finally, someone tells the truth." Within 2 hours, the comment section had turned into a bloodbath. Extended family members were sharing their own stories of my parents asking them for money. Church friends were expressing shock at the documented financial manipulation. Even family friends I hadn't seen in years were coming out of the woodwork to share their own experiences with my parents' borrowing habits. The best comment came from my dad's own brother. "I've been wondering why you guys always seem to have money troubles despite Derek bailing you out constantly. Now I know where the money was really going. Cabo trips and fishing boats while your son pays your bills. Shameful." But the real damage came when Stacy's friends started commenting. Apparently, they'd been hearing for months about how Stacy's successful brother was paying for this lavish wedding. When they saw the evidence that Trevor had actually signed contracts taking financial responsibility, then couldn't afford to pay the bills, the story Stacy had been telling fell apart completely. Her friends were pointing out that she'd told them Trevor had everything handled and I was just helping out with small stuff. They thought the park wedding was a last-minute venue change for aesthetic reasons. By Sunday morning, my post and screenshots of both posts were circulating in family group chats and local Facebook groups. The damage was done and spreading. Mom called me around 10 a.m. crying. People were calling them liars and cheats. The pastor wanted to meet with them about their financial integrity. Dad's friends were avoiding him at work. I reminded her that maybe she should have thought about that before calling me a thief on social media. She insisted she was just hurt and upset, didn't mean for it to get this big, but I pointed out she didn't mean to get caught. She begged me to take down the post, promising to make a public apology and tell everyone she was wrong. I told her the post stays up. People deserve to know the truth about what kind of people they really are. When she wailed that this was destroying their reputation, I told her good. Their reputation was built on lies. Anyway, Dad called an hour later with a different tone, angry instead of pleading. He accused me of crossing a line by airing family business in public, asking if I had no shame. I told him I had less shame than he did, apparently, since at least I was telling the truth. When he threatened me to take it down as his last warning, I asked what he'd do. Uninvite me from another wedding I'm paying for? He hung up. Tuesday brought the most satisfying development yet. Stacy called me sobbing. "Derek, Trevor left me. I wasn't expecting that." "What?" "He said he can't handle the drama and the financial problems. He moved out yesterday. He said marrying into this family was a mistake." Trevor, the great provider, had cut and run the moment his new wife's family drama affected his precious reputation. The guy who was too good to be seen with me at his wedding had abandoned his wife 3 weeks after marrying her. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I actually was. Despite everything, I didn't want Stacy to get her heart broken. He said the Facebook stuff was embarrassing and he didn't sign up for this kind of family dysfunction. He said he married me, not the whole family's problems. Did he take the BMW? Of course he took the BMW. He said it was in his name, so I couldn't do anything about it. Classic Trevor, talking big about being a provider until the providing got complicated. What are you going to do? I don't know. I can't afford the apartment on my own. Mom and Dad are too embarrassed to help because everyone knows about their money problems now. I might have to move back in with them. Sucks to suck. Stacy, are you going to help me? And there it was. After everything, the uninvitation, the public humiliation, calling me a thief, she still expected me to ride to the rescue. No, I told you the Bank of Derek was closed. But I'm your sister. You're also the person who decided I wasn't good enough to attend your wedding. She hung up crying. But this time I didn't feel bad about it. Alan came over that evening with drinks and takeout, finding me on my deck, actually relaxed for the first time in months. When he asked how it felt to watch the whole house of cards collapse, I told him it felt pretty great. Trevor had bailed on Stacy. Mom and Dad were persona non grata in their social circle, and I was finally free from being their financial safety net. 6 months later, I heard through the family grapevine that Stacy was working 2 jobs and living with roommates. Trevor had apparently moved in with some woman from his office about a month after leaving Stacy. Mom and Dad had to find a new church because the gossip at their old one was too uncomfortable. Dad's fishing boat got repossessed. Mom had to get a part-time job at Target to help with bills. And me? I bought a house with a pool and a 3-car garage, paid cash. Turns out, when you stop bankrolling other people's poor decisions, you have a lot more money for your own life. Alan helped me move in, and as we sat on my new deck drinking and watching the sunset, he raised his bottle in a toast. To the most expensive education in family dynamics ever delivered. Worth every penny, I replied. Sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away. Consider it a masterclass in respect.